Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about kings or conquerors. It's about something older, quieter, the kind of history that doesn't make it into textbooks, but still lingers in the roots beneath your feet. So before you drift off, give this video a like if it earns it, and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. Now, turn off the lights, maybe light a candle, because tonight, we're headed deep into the jungle. Not just any jungle, one that remembers how people lived before pyramids rose and gods were named. At the heart of it all, a village of corn, stars, sweat, and silence. Congratulations. You've just stepped into a world that was never meant to be forgotten. Imagine yourself waking before the sun. The air is thick, not hot yet, but full of moisture, as if the jungle is exhaling around you. Cicadas buzz gently in the trees, and the smell of smoke clings to the thatch roof above your head. You're not a king or a priest. You are someone far more common, and, in some ways, far more vital. You are a corn farmer, a milpero. You rise not from a bed, but from a mat laid over packed earth. The floor beneath you is cool, and your joints ache a little from yesterday's work. Outside, someone stokes the fire, probably your wife or mother, and the faint aroma of damp wood and maize begins to fill the air. There is no need for a clock. The world tells time differently here. The way the light catches the clay walls, the angle of the sunbeams cutting through the smoke, the rhythm of birds in the ceiba tree. You step outside. The village is small, a scattering of wattle and daub houses surrounded by fields and jungle. Some structures are raised on low platforms, others nestled under palm roofs. Children chase each other barefoot through the dust. A dog, more bone than fur, dozes in the shade. Your day begins with the metat, a grinding stone heavy and worn smooth by generations of hands. Your wife or daughter is already there, rhythmically crushing maize into masa, the dough that will become tortillas. Its emotion passed down like breath itself. Forward, back, press, scrape, forward, back. You eat simply, warm tortillas, maybe a bit of squash or beans, chili if you're lucky. Meat is rare. Most of your diet is maize in one form or another. It's not just food, it is life. It is breath. In the myths, your people were made from corn. Not clay, not bone, not star stuff. Corn. After eating, you head into the fields. They are not neat rows like modern farms, but rather milpas, plots grown through a method of slash and burn agriculture. You've cleared part of the jungle, letting it rest, then burning it to nourish the soil. You don't plant just corn. You plant the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash. They support each other, literally and nutritionally, in a quiet kind of harmony. The work is constant. You weed by hand. You haul water in clay vessels. You check for insects, signs of fungus. If the gods are kind, the rains come on time. If not, well, there are always the ceremonies, always offerings, always prayers. Around you, the jungle is never truly still. Monkeys chatter in the distance. A toucan cries. You feel eyes on you sometimes, not human eyes, but something older. The Maya believe spirits live in the forest, alaxes, little beings that protect the land. You leave them offerings, bits of food, shiny stones. It's polite and prudent. By midday, the heat is thick and pressing. You retreat for rest. Maybe you lie in a hammock strung between trees. Maybe you visit the sweat lodge, the temazcal, where heat and steam cleanse your body and, it's said, your spirit. You sit with others in the dark, surrounded by stone and steam and whispered prayers. The sweat pours from you, but it's not discomfort. It's renewal. When you emerge, blinking and clean, the day has softened. The shadows are longer. The air is heavy with the scent of flowers and the distant promise of rain. Children help gather firewood. You mend a fishing net, or carve a tool, or patch a hole in the roof. Life is not easy, but it is rhythm, repetition, a cycle that links you to your parents and their parents before them. As the sun dips low, the community gathers. Stories are told, not just for fun. Stories are how history is kept, how gods are remembered, how warnings are passed on. You listen to an old man speak of the time the rain didn't come, or the time a jaguar walked through the village and no one saw it but the dog. In the distance, on a hill perhaps, a stone temple catches the last light of day. You don't go there often. That's for the priests, the nobles. But you feel it watching, like the gods themselves, always observing. Night comes gently. You eat again. More tortillas, a bit of beans. You lie down on your mat. And the jungle begins to hum louder. Insects, frogs, the deep rhythmic thump of a howler monkey echoing far away. You close your eyes. And sleep comes not with silence, but with the familiar lullaby of a world still alive, still growing, still turning. You wake before the sun stirs, not to a rooster's crow, but to the hush of the jungle breathing. The air is thick, still clinging to last night's heat. A breeze hasn't yet found its way between the trees, and the woven mat beneath your back smells faintly of sweat and smoke. Through the thatched roof above, the stars are slipping away, fading like memories. But one remains, Venus, the morning star, watching, as it always does, with quiet insistence. You sit up slowly, no sudden movement, not here, not where everything you do must answer to the gods, to the earth, and to the village that knows your name before you do. Your bones ache, not from age, you're hardly past 20, but from the rhythm of the work that defines you. Farming, grinding, carrying, always moving, always beneath the gaze of something older. You stretch and feel the pull in your shoulders, the soft creak of knees unused to rest. Outside, the cicadas have begun their chorus, dry, electric, as if calling the sun up with them. Your home is simple, a rectangle of packed clay and wood, open at both ends to invite breeze and gods alike. In the corner, your mother crouches over the komel, the flat clay griddle, warming it for tortillas. The scent of maize is already in the air, always maize. There is no word in your tongue for food that doesn't begin and end with corn. You are made of it. The gods built you from its dough. It grows with you, dies with you. She doesn't speak. She never does this early. There is no need. The sounds of the morning are language enough. The hiss of wood catching flame, the thump of dough patted between palms, the distant bark of dogs already chasing ghosts. Your little brother is still asleep, curled near the hearth. A lizard darts over the warm stones beside him, pausing long enough to blink at you. Slowly, as if in greeting, then vanishing into a crack in the wall. You envy its ease. There is no work waiting for it, no gods to please, no rain to beg for. You step outside. The village is waking, not all at once but in layers, like the mist that still curls at the feet of the caber tree in the center of the plaza. Smoke drifts from other homes. Chickens fuss in the dust. An old woman shakes a mat free of dreams. A man sharpens a stone blade against a river rock, the scrape steady and meditative. You head toward the fields. The path winds between huts, past low walls of stone and split bamboo. Every corner has eyes. Not human ones, gods, spirits, ancestors. Their faces peer from carvings, from the knots in tree trunks, from the patterns in woven cloth. You nod to them as you pass, Out of respect, out of habit, out of fear. The path grows steep. The jungle crowds in. You feel it watching, not menacing, just present. The leaves overhead shimmer with dew, dripping it in lazy rhythm onto the undergrowth. Somewhere nearby, a howler monkey groans a warning to the morning. Or maybe a welcome. It's hard to tell with monkeys. By the time you reach the edge of the milpa, the cultivated clearing, the sun is rising behind the trees. Gold spills across the stalks of corn, painting them with life. You stop for a moment and listen. The plants speak, not in words, but in rustle, in sway, in silence. You kneel, hands already dirty. You begin to weed, to tie, to check the stalks for signs. Too yellow, too dry. You do not work alone. Others arrive, cousins, neighbors, sometimes even the priest apprentice. No one speaks. The rhythm is too sacred. Hours pass like this. Time measured by the movement of light across your arms, by the changing pitch of cicadas, by the way your stomach grumbles in sync with the sun. At midday, you break. Not with ceremony, just a simple pause. A gourd of water, a handful of roasted squash seeds, a tortilla still warm from the cloth your mother wrapped it in. A cloud passes over. You look up, not at the sky, but at the hill in the distance, where the temple rises like a memory from stone. The gods live there, or so they say, but they also live here, in the dirt beneath your nails, in the ache in your back, in the steam that rises from the tortillas when the komul hisses. The afternoon brings more work, hauling water from the cenote, repairing a section of field wall, helping your uncle chase a goat that thinks it's a jaguar. Laughter ripples now and then, not loud, just enough to remind you that even beneath the weight of duty, you are alive, and that is a sacred thing. Toward evening, the sky turns the color of old clay pots. Swallows dart low. Your hands are scratched, your legs spattered with earth, but your heart is quiet. There is something honest in a day spent like this, bent over the gift that feeds your people. You return home as dusk gathers. The village smells of wood smoke, sweat, and stew. A baby cries somewhere. A drum taps gently. Someone practicing for the festival. You pass a man carving a glyph into the lintel of his doorway. He looks up and smiles, not at you, but at the day that's done. Back inside your home, your mother ladles out stew thick with beans and wild greens. You eat slowly, savoring the salt. Your brother shows you a beetle he caught, its shell shining like obsidian. You let him think it's magic. Maybe it is. After supper, your father burns copal in a clay bowl, wafting the smoke toward the corners of the home. A prayer for health, for rain, for peace. The scent is sharp, sweet, ancient. It clings to your clothes, to your thoughts. You lie down again on the mat, muscles heavy with the kind of tired that earns its rest. Outside, the frogs have begun their songs. 1,000 soft voices, layered and lulling. Fireflies blink in the cracks of the walls. And just before sleep takes you, you hear it. The low hum of the village breathing. A quiet, collective exhale. The sound of hundreds of lives woven into one, like threads in a huipil, like kernels in a cob. Tomorrow, it will begin again. The same, but not the same. Always in service. Always in rhythm. Always beneath the carved stone eyes that never blink. The night doesn't fall so much as settle. Gently, like a cotton blanket draped by unseen hands. You wake briefly, sometime after midnight, stirred by the hush of a soft breeze, threading its way through the open ends of the hut. The fire has gone to embers, and in their faint red light, the shadows of your family rise like low hills. sleeping bodies curled and breathing slowly. You don't move. The quiet has its own presence here. A sacred thing, not to be disturbed. Even the insects hush themselves for a moment, and all you can hear is the distant trickle of water. Maybe the cenote, maybe not. Maybe something else. The villagers say the spirits travel at night, drawn to water and smoke. If you wake and find your sandals turned around or your mat slightly moved, it's best not to ask why. By dawn, the village stirs again. This time, your task is not in the fields, but with your cousin's family. Their roof has been leaking, not a problem during dry seasons, but the rains will come soon, and to delay would be to offend Chak, the rain god. So you spend the morning cutting thatch with obsidian knives, weaving palm fronds, and binding them into bundles. Your hands work on instinct. This is a skill taught early, long before numbers or writing. Roofs first, words later. Around midday, you're invited into their home to share lunch. The matriarch places a small bowl of chaya stew before you, and for a moment, you hesitate. Not because you aren't hungry, you are, but because there's reverence in this bowl. The greens were gathered at dawn, the broth simmered low for hours, the salt traded for on the last moon. Each bite is a lineage. There's a girl beside you, no more than 10, who watches you eat like she's studying your soul. When you finish, she leans in close and whispers, "Do you know about the maize woman?" You blink. You nod slowly. "Good," she says, and without another word, vanishes out the doorway. Children have their own myths, their own secrets. It's said they remember things from before this life even. Sometimes they know the names of stars that haven't been spoken aloud in 100 years. You spend the afternoon walking with your uncle to the edge of the old fields, not the current milpa. These ones have been left to rest, as tradition demands. The jungle has begun its slow return, curling vines through the husks of what once was bounty. But even here, there is purpose. You help him plant squash in the undergrowth. The vines will keep the soil shaded and fertile, feeding the land instead of draining it. He tells you a story while you work, not in full, just fragments. A man who tried to farm without offerings, a storm that washed away his home, a stone that wept blood. You don't interrupt. These stories are half teachings, half warnings. They're not meant to be finished, only remembered. On the way back, you stop at a stone altar at the edge of a clearing. It's old, older than the village maybe, covered in moss and carved with glyphs no one reads anymore. You place a small offering on the flat top, a sliver of dried chili, a pinch of ground cacao, a whisper of breath, just enough to say, "I'm listening." Evening comes again, and with it the promise of rain. You can smell it before you see it, petrichor and ozone. The older villagers say the sky has moods, just like people. Tonight, it's thoughtful, slow-moving, heavy with memory. Dinner is simple again. Roasted plantains and mashed beans. Your father sings a song while he eats, tuneless but warm. You don't know the words. Maybe he doesn't either. Maybe that's the point. Later, as the rain begins, you sit beneath the overhang with your brother and watch it fall. The sound is hypnotic. A slow drumbeat on leaves and stone. Somewhere, frogs croak in rhythm. He asks you if the gods are sad. You say no, just tired maybe, just remembering. When you sleep that night, your dreams are vivid. Not stories exactly, but sensations. The weight of a corn basket on your back, the grit of sand between your teeth, the way the jungle hums when you're still enough to hear it. And so, as the first light breaks above the jungle canopy, casting long shafts of gold through the misty trees, your morning begins again. You are neither noble nor forgotten, just one of hundreds who will bend their backs today in devotion to the gods and to maize. Your hut is small but sufficient, made of wattle and daub, its thatched roof still wet from the dew. You stretch your arms. The night's humidity clings to your skin, the scent of burnt copal still lingering faintly in the corners from yesterday's offering. Before you even step outside, you hear the soft thuk-thuk-thuk rhythm of your mother's grinding stone. She's been awake for hours, kneeling on a woven mat, grinding soaked maize into a fine paste on the matat. Her hands are calloused from years of this, a quiet, constant labor of love. You pass her on your way to the water jars. She doesn't speak. She only nods, the kind of nod that carries years of shared mornings. You lift the clay lid of the ollas, feeling the cool breath of the water inside, and begin preparing for your day. Outside, the village is already stirring. Thin trails of smoke curl from chimneys, twisting upward into the lightening sky. Children chase a loose dog past the elder's hut, their laughter sharp against the soft hum of insects. You see your uncle dragging a fishing net toward the river, his steps familiar, deliberate, quiet. The river is a lifeline, just as the maize is. But today, your work lies in the fields, as it does most days. The path to the fields is worn and winding. You pass by low altars where bits of fruit, bone, and obsidian glint beneath bundles of feathers. The offerings aren't elaborate, but they are sincere. Every family gives what they can. Every stalk of corn that grows owes something to the gods after all. The fields themselves are a patchwork of green, yellow, and brown. Rows of maize, interwoven with beans and squash, rise from mounded soil. You are not alone. Dozens of others move among the plants, checking stalks, brushing off pests, adjusting the wooden supports. It's slow work, gentle work, but it's alive. The air smells of crushed leaves and damp earth. You can hear birds calling, clock, clock, from the trees nearby, and every now and then, the buzzing of a dragonfly cuts past your ear. At midday, the sun is too harsh to work. Everyone gathers beneath the shade of a ceiba tree, the world tree, its roots said to stretch into the underworld. You sit on woven mats and share food wrapped in banana leaves, tamales, bits of roasted fish, a thick drink made from cacao and maize. Your sister tells a story she heard from the market, a stone carver in the city who claims to have dreamed of a jaguar that could speak. The elders nod politely. Stories are sacred, but the heat dulls attention. Most of you simply sip your drinks and doze. But the rest is short. There's always more to do. Later, you join your cousin near the sweat lodge, a dome-shaped hut built low to the ground, lined with hot stones and sealed with thick leaves. You crawl in slowly, carefully, and sit across from him in the steamy dark. A handful of herbs are thrown onto the stones, sweet-smelling leaves that make your lungs open. The air fills with a wet heat that presses down on your shoulders like the hand of an ancestor. The sweat lodge isn't just for cleansing the body, it's for cleansing the spirit. You sit in silence. Sweat rolls down your chest, drips into the earth, and in the dim glow of the embers, you remember dreams. Later, scrubbed clean and blinking into the cool dusk air, you help light small fires along the village paths. The smoke keeps insects away, but the light does more. It tells the spirits that this is a place of life, not shadows. Dinner is quiet. Your mother pours thick soup into bowls made from hollowed gourds. It smells of squash and spices, with just a hint of roasted chili. The meal is eaten on the ground, in the same spot where she ground the maize this morning. The stone is still warm. And as night creeps across the treetops and the stars slowly pierce the sky, your family gathers around the fire pit. Someone drums, not loud, not fast, just a heartbeat rhythm. Your grandfather tells a story about a hummingbird who raced the wind. You've heard it before, but you listen anyway, because this is life, the rhythm of it, the slow repetition of labor, the quiet rituals, the things too small for history books. The gods are still watching, the stars are still turning, and the corn always grows. Somewhere beyond the cornfields and sweat lodges, past the smoke-dusted villages and the soft slap of sandals on jungle paths, rose the stone city that breathed in patterns of stars. The city had many names, but to those who lived there, it was the navel of the world, a place where heaven and earth brushed shoulders. Imagine yourself walking its wide limestone causeways, the stones warm beneath your feet, the air thick with the scent of moss and charcoal. The temples rise ahead like frozen waves. Each stair, each carving, is a sentence in a language written not in ink, but in shadow and light. This is the city where Chak once gazed skyward and saw something no one else dared to see. He was not a king. He was not a warrior. He was something far older and in many ways far quieter. An Arkin, a reader of the gods, a counter of time, an astronomer. The Maya did not see a line between the spiritual and the scientific. The stars were not distant balls of gas. They were deities with predictable habits, messengers who whispered fate through cycles. Chak Tok lived his life under a sky filled with patterns, and he studied them, year after year, stone after stone, shadow after shadow. In the temple of the Sky Eye, he worked with tools that today might seem simple. A rod of polished wood, a bowl of water, an obsidian shard. But to him, they were extensions of the heavens. He marked the equinoxes with red pigment. He noted how Venus would disappear, then reappear, like a god playing hide and seek. And it was Venus, always Venus, that troubled him. He had seen its rhythm broken once, a missed appearance, a delay in its cycle. He checked his calculations again and again, brushing bone dust from his scrolls, whispering to the night as if it might correct him. But it never did. What he saw, or thought he saw, was a blink in the eye of the sky. The gods, he believed, were beginning to close their eyes. Now, in the calm of this night centuries later, it's easy to wonder what that meant. For him, it meant dread wrapped in mystery. A blink could mean anything. The end of a cycle, the death of a god, or perhaps the forgetting of a people. And so he did what only the wisest would do. He did not panic. He carved. Stone by stone, he inscribed what he had seen. Not in the public square, but in a chamber deep within the observatory. A place few would ever visit. There, on the inner wall of what would later be mistaken for a storeroom, he etched the date, the stars, the silence, and his warning. The gods may forget. Prepare the stories. Chak Tok did not stop watching the sky. He remained at his post, quietly charting, quietly fearing. He taught apprentices. He wrote in code. Some say he went blind from staring too long into the sun's path. Others say he walked into the jungle one morning and never returned. What is known is this: the next cycle did come. Venus returned, eventually. The world did not end. But years later, when war broke out and drought seized the land, the king at the time asked the priests, "Did we not see this coming?" And someone whispered, "Chak Tok did." but we didn't believe him. Today, archaeologists have found part of that hidden chamber. The glyphs are damaged, some are unreadable, but his name is there. His sky maps are unmistakable, and his message, though faint, still lingers. Prepare the stories, because if the gods blink, even for a moment, the only thing left will be what we remember. Somewhere beyond the cornfields and sweat lodges, past the smoke-dusted villages and the soft slap of sandals on jungle paths, rose a stone city that breathed in patterns of stars. The city had many names, but to those who lived there, it was the navel of the world, a place where heaven and earth brushed shoulders. Imagine yourself walking its wide limestone causeways, the stones warm beneath your feet, the air thick with the scent of moss and charcoal. The temples rise ahead like frozen waves. Each stair, each carving, is a sentence in a language written not in ink, but in shadow and light. This is the city where Chaktok once gazed skyward and saw something no one else dared to see. He was not a king. He was not a warrior. He was something far older, and in many ways far quieter. An Arkin, a reader of the gods, a counter of time, an astronomer. The Maya did not see a line between the spiritual and the scientific. The stars were not distant balls of gas. They were deities with predictable habits, messengers who whispered fate through cycles. Chaktok lived his life under a sky filled with patterns, and he studied them. Year after year, stone after stone, shadow after shadow. In the temple of the sky eye, he worked with tools that today might seem simple. A rod of polished wood, a bowl of water, an obsidian shard. But to him, they were extensions of the heavens. He marked the equinoxes with red pigment. He noted how Venus would disappear, then reappear, like a god playing hide and seek. And it was Venus, always Venus, that troubled him. He had seen its rhythm broken once, a missed appearance, a delay in its cycle. He checked his calculations again and again, brushing bone dust from his scrolls, whispering to the night as if it might correct him. But it never did. What he saw, or thought he saw, was a blink in the eye of the sky. The gods, he believed, were beginning to close their eyes. Now, in the calm of this night centuries later, it's easy to wonder what that meant. For him, it meant dread wrapped in mystery. A blink could mean anything: the end of a cycle, the death of a god, or perhaps the forgetting of a people. And so he did what only the wisest would do. He did not panic. He carved. Stone by stone, he inscribed what he had seen, not in the public square, but in a chamber deep within the observatory, a place few would ever visit. There, on the inner wall of what would later be mistaken for a storeroom, he etched the date, the stars, the silence, and his warning: the gods may forget. Prepare the stories. Chaktok did not stop watching the sky. He remained at his post, quietly charting, quietly fearing. He taught apprentices. He wrote in code. Some say he went blind from staring too long into the sun's path. Others say he walked into the jungle one morning and never returned. But his days were not filled with prophecy alone. There was the steady rhythm of life, as slow and precise as the turning of the long count calendar. Each morning, he would rise before the sun, when the shadows of the temples still leaned like sleeping giants across the courtyards. He would stand atop the observatory's eastern platform and wait, watching for the first glint of light that pierced the jungle line. When it came, it always struck the same spot on the ceremonial stair. Always, except that one time. That one time it landed elsewhere. He remembered how his breath caught, how even the birds fell silent. He didn't tell anyone, not at first. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to be sure. So he watched again the next day, and again the next week, and he adjusted his instruments, just slightly. He even moved his morning ritual, climbing a different stair, watching from a slightly altered angle. But still, the sun missed its mark, only by a hair, a finger's width. But in the life of an kin, that was the difference between divine order and warning. He began to dig through older inscriptions, not just those etched in stone, but scratched into bark paper codices, folded carefully like the wings of insects. These were kept in a dry room beneath the temple, where only the dust dared enter. There, he found something odd. A similar account, centuries old. A priest astronomer, unnamed, had once recorded a misalignment, a blink in the heavens, and beside the glyphs, a short sentence in the curled script of elder priests. When the gods forget the sky, the ground will thirst. Chaktok's stomach turned cold, for they had just entered a second season of low rains. The lakes had pulled back from their own shores. The people were murmuring, more from superstition than science. But Chaktok saw them as one and the same. He consulted the elders, carefully, quietly. He brought the scrolls and spoke in low tones, but they dismissed him. There are always strange seasons, they said. The gods sleep, the gods wake. We do not write warnings every time it clouds over. Still, the unease stayed in his bones. He began to train a young apprentice, a girl named Ekna, whose eyes were sharper than his, and whose hands never trembled. He showed her the scrolls, taught her how to track the shadows, told her the truth about Venus. Together, in silence, they watched the stars grow strange. One night, Ekna pointed upward, her finger trembling. "Where is Ixchel?" The goddess of the moon, who should have been visible then, was veiled, hidden, not behind clouds, but seemingly absent from her proper path. Chaktok made no sound, but inside something shifted. He instructed Ekna to begin a secret codex, not of gods or rituals, but of what was missing. And so they recorded absence, vanishment, silence, the story of a sky that had started to forget itself, and the story of a people who might one day forget the sky. More years passed. Ekna grew older, wiser. She would one day become the first female keeper of the Temple of the Sky Eye, though that was still many moons away. Chaktok became slower. His sight dimmed. The long nights took more from him than he admitted, and one morning he did not wake in his chambers. His sandals were missing. His staff was gone. No signs of struggle. Only the stone observatory, quiet and complete. Ekna searched the jungle's edge, but found no trace. Only months later, while cleaning the chamber behind the altar, she discovered something new. A final inscription hidden beneath a removable slab. Small, plain, just a few lines. Venus blinks again. I am going to ask why. That final message, carved so simply, struck Ekna harder than any omen. She copied the glyphs into her own codex. Beneath it, in quiet brushstrokes, she wrote, "Let his question remain, for when the gods blink, perhaps they're listening too." From then on, Ekna kept two kinds of records, the expected and the invisible. One for the rituals, the processions, the gods that still showed up on time, and one for the things that didn't. She taught her own apprentices to do the same. not to fear absence, but to track it, honor it, to remember that silence sometimes says more than a storm. The years wore on. The city around them changed. New kings rose, old ones vanished from memory. Droughts deepened. Rituals grew more frantic. Offerings more desperate. But deep in the temple of the Sky Eye, a quiet tradition endured, the study of what wasn't there. Then, on a night not unlike the first, heavy with heat, buzzing with cicadas, a second blink occurred. Venus again went missing. But this time, they were ready. Eknar's apprentices, now grown and wise, lit the old fires, unfolded the original scrolls, opened Chaktok's hidden chamber, and read aloud his words, slowly, reverently. The gods may forget. Prepare the stories. And for reasons no one could explain, the rains returned weeks later. Not as a flood, not as a miracle, just steady drops. Soft enough to soak the earth, loud enough to hush the panic. The elders credited the gods, but Eknar and her circle said nothing. They only added a note in the codex. When the gods blink, whisper back. Centuries later, long after the city was abandoned and its name half forgotten, a team of archaeologists stumbled on a sealed chamber beneath layers of stone. Inside, they found remnants of pigment, fragments of bark paper, and wall etchings in two hands. One sharp and meticulous, the other softer, more fluid, likely a woman's. The inscriptions took years to decode. Many remain a mystery, but among them, clear as morning light, was one unmistakable carving, a single eye, half-lidded, and beside it, the faint echo of a name, Chak Toki Chak. Some say it means great claw of the rain. Others say it means he who waited for the blink. But the meaning, like the sky, changes depending on when and how you look. And somewhere in the forest, where stone ruins sleep beneath vines, there are still those who bring offerings not to the gods, but to the astronomer who watched when others did not, to the one who remembered silence, to the one who whispered back. The astronomer's name, Chak Tok Ichak, was carved softly into the corners of time, in places where few eyes ever wandered. His apprentices remembered him not with titles or fanfare, but with the quiet respect of those who understood the weight of watching the sky. It was said that when he walked, he counted, not steps, but moments, not people, but pulses in the breath of the world. When a bird flew too low at dusk, when the moon slipped behind clouds as if shy, he observed everything, not as a man eager for control, but as a soul trying to harmonize with something greater than himself. In a small stone courtyard behind the Temple of the Sky Eye, Chak Tok kept a garden, not for food, but for symbols. He grew cacao, sacred tobacco, morning glories, plants said to open the mind or carry words into dreams. Some believed he used them to commune with gods. Others thought he simply found peace in tending what grew without needing to be seen. And in that peace, he dreamed. His dreams were not always his own. They came with voices, images, flickering constellations bending in impossible ways. He dreamed of a darkness moving slowly across the sky like spilled ink, and stars snuffed out like candles by an unseen hand. One such dream woke him in the deep blue before dawn, heart quiet but steady, as if waiting for something. That morning, he climbed to the temple roof alone, long before the priests would chant or the incense would burn. The sky above was not yet gold, not yet pink. It was indigo, veiled and waiting. He lay flat on the stone and stared upward. And there it was again. Venus, the morning star, had missed its cue. He marked it carefully in his scrolls, noted it with more precision than anything before. Then he waited. The next day it returned, but not quite as it should. Its place, its brightness, its timing, they all spoke of something just slightly wrong, a thread loose in a great tapestry. To speak of it aloud would cause fear. So Chaktok whispered it into stone. In that hidden chamber where he carved, a room beneath the chamber where offerings were stored, there were no witnesses, only bats and breath, and the echo of his chisel tapping against centuries. There, he told a truth wrapped in myth, that even the gods can grow weary. He wasn't the first to worry the sky might one day change. Older texts, those burned or buried, spoke of cycles long forgotten, of gods sleeping, of stars rearranged. But Chaktok's worry wasn't born from fear of the end. It was born from a deeper fear that the stories might not be passed on in time. Because he knew a forgotten god is no longer a god, just a silence. And so he began to teach differently. He no longer told apprentices what to believe, but how to listen. He showed them how to feel when the stars changed rhythm, how to smell the shift in wind during an eclipse, how to sit perfectly still as night unwrapped itself, so the forest could speak first. One of his apprentices, a girl named Ixbahana, became particularly attuned to this. She said the stars had voices and that Venus had gone quiet for a reason. Chaktok never confirmed nor denied her claim, but when he left, it was she who inherited the hidden room. She who continued carving, her hand smaller but just as steady. The temple priests never knew of it. The kings, too preoccupied with tribute and conquest, paid no mind. Until the rain stopped. At first, it was a delay, then a concern, then a quiet dread. Crops wilted, wells dropped, and suddenly, the astronomers, once the quiet keepers of rhythm, were summoned with urgency. "What have you seen?" they were asked. And Ixbahana spoke not of punishment or wrath, but of memory. "The sky," she said, "remembers differently now. We must remind it who we are." She led ceremonies not of sacrifice, but of stories. Gatherings where elders recited tales of corn gods, of stargazers, of love and wind and light. She believed that to tell the stories aloud was to thread the world back together, like mending a broken net, string by string. Some mocked her, but the rains returned. Not fully, not immediately, but enough to plant again, enough to hope. And in her chamber, beneath the stone, she carved. The gods blinked, we spoke, and for now, they've opened their eyes. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered fragments of her carving alongside the fading glyphs of Chaktok. The chamber, they realized, was not a storeroom. It was an archive of silence, the place where uncertainty was preserved, not erased. No grand monument stood for Chaktok Ichak, no gold buried with his bones. But on certain nights, when Venus hesitates on the edge of dawn, some say you can still hear him, a whisper behind the wind, a murmur in the trees. "Prepare the stories," he says, "because if the gods blink, even for a moment, the only thing left will be what we remember." But let's step back for a moment, not into the stars, but into the quiet, dusty corners of the observatory, where Chaktok Ichak spent most of his waking life. You'd think a man who watched the heavens would live like a priest or a prince, but the reality was more humble, more worn. His chamber smelled of limestone and sweat. The tools of his trade were stored in clay pots and reed bundles. Jade sighting rods, turtle shell bowls filled with mineral pigments, scraps of bark paper marked with careful glyphs. There were no golden instruments, no telescopes of polished brass, just light and shadow, just time and the patience to wait for answers. Each morning before dawn, he would climb to the highest ledge of the temple, a place that caught the very first kiss of sunlight. There, he would kneel and simply wait, not to pray, not to speak, but to witness. Sometimes, he would stay there for hours, unmoving, watching as the sun crawled above the trees and bled golden light across the city's stone bones. The birds would sing around him, bugs buzzing in curious circles, but he paid no mind, because in that golden sliver of sky, somewhere between light and nothing, he saw the gods move, and when the light shifted, when the shadow crossed the wall a finger's width too early or too late, he would mark it, just a small scratch on a stone, just a dot on a strip of bark, one dot of thousands. But it meant something, and in time, all those somethings began to whisper to him. They whispered of patterns, cycles, gaps, not prophecies. Never that. The Maya didn't need fortune tellers. They needed people who remembered the rhythm. And Chaktok, he remembered everything. It was during one of those silent vigils that the pattern cracked. He'd watched Venus long enough to know its language. When it would vanish into the sun's glow, when it would emerge like a drop of morning fire, he knew its absences and returns like a friend's footsteps. But this time, it stayed gone. Longer than expected. Not by much, just a few days. But for the Maya, a few days could be the difference between a harvest and a famine, between order and omen. He checked the stars. He redrew the calendar wheels. He even questioned his own memory. Maybe it was he who blinked. Maybe the sky had stayed true, and his tired eyes had betrayed him. But deep down, in the pit of his knowing, he understood. This wasn't just a slip in the sky. It was a soft knock, a quiet cough. Something was stirring. So he carved. And carving, in those days, was an act of resistance, because not all truths were welcome, especially when the truth was wrapped in uncertainty. The king liked order. The priests liked answers. But Chaktok brought neither. Only questions shaped in stone. Why would the gods blink? Was it boredom? Was it grief? Did they grow tired of being remembered? He had no answers. Only the weight of silence. The chamber where he carved his warning was not grand. It was a crawl space beneath the observatory, used once for storing ritual mats and bundles of dried maize. He cleared it out himself, lit it with resin candles, and worked by the flicker of flame and instinct. He didn't write in grand glyphs meant for crowds. He wrote in shorthand, marks only another Arkin might decipher. He drew the sky not as it looked, but as it felt, interrupted, trembling, confused. He shaped his own fear into lines, because that was all he could offer. The warning was not meant to stop anything. It was meant to be found. Later. By someone who would understand. And perhaps, even now, in the hush between sleep and waking, you understand a little too, because you too have looked at the sky and wondered if something beyond it remembers you. You too have felt the flicker, that strange moment when the world feels too quiet, too balanced, and something invisible shifts just a little, a blink in the pattern, a missing note in the song. That's what Chaktok felt. And though his world did not collapse that day, though Venus returned and the heavens held, He had seen the possibility of forgetting. So he prepared the stories. Because if the gods forgot the people must not forget themselves. He did not live to see the droughts, the wars, the slow retreat of stone into vine. But he knew it would come, in some form or another. And he knew one truth above all. Stories were the only thing that survived blinking gods. So here you are, centuries later, lying quietly, listening to the hush of your own breath, and somewhere far away, beyond time and jungle and ruin, a name is still carved in stone. Chak Toki Chak, a man who counted stars, who read silence like scripture, who told the future not with fire and smoke but with patience, and who, even now, whispers softly through stone. Prepare the stories. You wake to stillness. No sound of corn grinding, no morning footsteps, no fire being stoked, only the hush of thick air pressed against leaves and the distant drip of water from unseen heights. This is not a village, not anymore. This is a ruin, though you wouldn't know it yet. The jungle moves slowly here, like it's exhaling in its sleep. Vines creep over stone like old hands claiming something they once held dear. Trees rise straight from rooftops, their roots cascading over temple steps like frozen waterfalls. Moss clings to glyphs once carved in celebration. Parrots flash past in colors too bright for sorrow. And beneath it all, beneath the roots and rot and silence, there is a city. Copan, or what remains of it. It's hard to say when a city truly dies. Does it die when the last fire burns out? When the final name is spoken? Or does it die when no one remembers it was ever alive? Copan did not fall in fire. There was no grand invasion, no final trumpet. Its death was not a scream. It was a hush, a long, slow sigh as its walls crumbled inward and its stories stopped being told. But rewind 1,000 years. Imagine stepping into that same place. Not a ruin, but a jewel. Copan was once a shining city, nestled like a gem in the valleys of modern-day Honduras. It stood where the river bent gently through the land, and where trade routes crossed like threads on a loom. Its plazas echoed with music and laughter. Its temples scraped the sky. Here kings called themselves gods. Here artists carved entire histories into staircases. Here calendars were made not to mark time, but to speak with it. The people of Copan lived with time as a partner. They didn't just count days. They believed the days themselves remembered things. Every date had a face, every number a story. It was said that to write the right glyph on the right day was to open a door through time. And so they built, stele, tall stone monuments, lined the plazas like ancient storybooks. Each one told of a ruler, a war, a marriage, a star's return. Each one was a conversation with the gods. The city's most famous staircase, now weathered but still standing, is called the Hieroglyphic Stairway. Over 2,000 glyphs climb its steps, retelling centuries of dynasties. It is not read from top to bottom but from side to side. A puzzle of power, legacy and pride. And at its center is one man, Waksa Klajun Uba Kawil, the 13th king of Copan. His name, carved again and again in stone, means Lord of the 13 Faces of Kawil, referencing a lightning god of Maya lore. His reign was long, grand, but it was also a turning point. It was during his rule that the city stretched itself, perhaps too far. New monuments, new rituals, more demands, more debts. The people built higher, dug deeper, and the gods, as they always do in myths, grew quiet. Yet even in this golden age, The seeds of the jungle were already there, lurking, waiting. Not all silence is sudden. Sometimes it seeps in slowly, like water rising between the floorboards, unnoticed until it soaks your feet. That's how the quiet came to Copan. The city did not fall to conquest or plague. It fell to something more invisible, pressure, invisible burdens building upon shoulders already bent. The rulers asked more. The rituals grew more elaborate. The monuments more ambitious. But the rains, they were less kind. The soil, tired. The trees on the hills, gone, cut to feed the fires of expansion. And so the land grew thin. The crops struggled. The rivers swelled one season, then shriveled the next. Farmers, once proud to serve the gods, began to grumble. Their hands, once devoted, now ached with doubt. Yet the kings still carved. Waxaklajun Uba Kawil, the same king whose name adorned the great stairway, kept building, as though stone could silence suffering. He raised new temples, taller than the last. He held rituals that painted the plazas red. He called on the gods louder and louder, but the gods, it seemed, had already looked away. And then, one day, the king was gone. Scholars believe he was captured by a rival city and ritually killed. His death was not just the end of a reign. It was the cracking of a mirror. Copan's reflection of glory began to ripple, then blur. A new king was placed on the throne. A boy, barely old enough to hold a staff. His regent tried to steer the city back to peace, to humility, to the old ways. But time, once a friend to Copan, had become something else entirely. A weight. The monuments grew fewer, the plazas emptier. Within a generation, the population began to scatter. Some say they fled to the hills. Others say they followed dreams or prophecies into the jungle. There was no mass exodus, no smoking crater, just fewer fires, fewer voices, eventually none. But even as the people left, the city remained, for a while. Abandoned, but not empty. The jungle came, not as a conqueror, but as a memory. Roots pressed between stones, as if trying to read the carvings. Trees grew through rooftops, as if wearing them like crowns. Jaguars slept in places where kings once wept. Parrots nested in altars. And the glyphs, once bold, once proud, began to fade beneath moss and dust. For centuries, no one spoke of Copan. But stories have a way of surviving, even when voices do not. The jungle has no need for haste. It remembers in stillness. Where once the thrum of drums echoed across plazas and the clatter of carved sandals danced over limestone, now came the hush of mist through fern, and the soft crack of creepers wrapping ancient doorways. The jungle did not erase Copan in a single season. It seduced it into silence, and Copan, in its stillness, began to dream. Roots wrapped around the ball court like sleeping serpents. The stairway of kings, the one etched with the names and deeds of dynasties, became a nesting ground for insects and owls. Copan teaches us this. Not all falls are sudden. Some cities disappear the way fireflies do, fading between one blink and the next. And in that softness, there is sorrow, but also peace. Because even as the jungle took root and covered the plazas, even as vines grew over gods and glyphs, the memory did not die. It just slept. Until one day, centuries later, an explorer tripped over a stone. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. No golden idols, no sudden riches. Just a mossy step, and then another, and another. Until, with patience and dust-brushing hands, Copan began to return. Not to how it was, but to how it could be remembered. And maybe that's enough. There's something poetic in how the jungle reclaims. It doesn't rage, it doesn't roar, it simply grows. One leaf at a time, one root in the right crack, one gentle breath of moisture soaking into the seams of old stone. Over years and then centuries, vines crept over the temples. Figs sent roots downward, patient and quiet, until they split stairways with the same indifference they split soil. Parrots made homes in cracks carved for gods. Bats slept where incense once burned. Rain collected where kings once knelt. But it wasn't abandonment. Not exactly. The city didn't fall to fire or war. It wasn't conquered in a day. Copan slowed. It softened. The farmers left first, then the masons, then the priests. The last scribes etched only half-finished records. A calendar stopped mid-sentence, then silence. Some say drought was the cause. Others point to over-farming, or a shifting trade route, or the fragile balance between divine right and dwindling corn. But the truth is likely quieter. Sometimes a place simply runs out of people to believe in it. And so Copan became a story told by trees. When the first modern visitors arrived, long after the stones were forgotten, they were not archaeologists. They were wanderers, traders, adventurers with machetes and journals. They wrote of hills that weren't hills, of bumps in the earth that felt too regular, too purposeful. They didn't know they were walking across temples. And when the digging began, it wasn't treasure that they found. It was time. Layer after layer of time. Each stratum revealing not riches, but rhythm. How the city pulsed in ceremonial cycles. How its people watched the sky like it was a second sun. One layer revealed a plaza. Beneath that, another plaza. And beneath that, a stairway to nowhere. The archaeologists would later call it the Rosalila Temple, a perfectly preserved shrine buried intact within another building, as if someone, long ago, had known the outer world would collapse, and so sealed away one perfect memory. Inside Rosalila, the walls were still painted, red and white, vibrant as blood and bone. Glyphs traced the sky's motion. Masks of the storm god peered down with jade eyes. It was a secret kept not by accident, but by design. A temple within a temple. A time capsule made of stone. And here's the strange thing. When they opened it, the air inside was still sweet, as if the temple had held its breath, waiting for someone to remember. This is how Copan speaks now. Not in full sentences, but in fragments. A painted shard here, a buried carving there, a priest necklace left beneath a step, and each whisper tells the same thing. We were here, we mattered, and we remembered the sky. Imagine standing alone in the plaza today. The jungle hums with insects. A bird calls in the distance. The stones are warm, but they don't answer questions. What was the final night like? Who was the last child to run across the steps? Which god blinked first? Some stories are meant to be told, others simply felt. And in Copan, the silence feels like a song that hasn't ended, just paused. In the soft hush of dusk, as the shadows grow long across Copan's moss-covered plazas, the stones themselves seem to breathe. Not loudly, not enough to startle, but just enough that if you closed your eyes and sat still, you might believe the city is only resting. And in many ways, it is. There are still glyphs on walls that no one can read, still bones beneath temples that no one has moved, still stairways that lead nowhere, or perhaps everywhere depending on how you walk them. Some archaeologists speak of termination rituals, ceremonies where buildings were symbolically killed before being buried, fires lit, offerings placed, masks turned face down. To the Maya, a temple wasn't just architecture, it was alive, and when its purpose was fulfilled, it was put to rest with ceremony, not rubble. The Rosalila temple was not torn down, it was entombed, a sacred shell around a sacred core, a cocoon meant to preserve the memory of the gods who once stood watch above the trees. And maybe that's why the jungle has been so gentle here. Other cities were devoured, but in Copan, the trees seem more like caretakers than conquerors. They drape the stones in green, they keep the sun off the glyphs, they hush the wind, and every once in a while, they let something slip. In 1989, a team excavating near the ball court found something strange. A tunnel leading beneath the Acropolis. At first, it was assumed to be a drainage system, but as they traced the tunnels, they found chambers, niches carved into earth, offerings still intact, and deeper still, the remains of a building that no one had seen in over 1,000 years, not because it was destroyed, but because it was buried, intentionally. As if someone had whispered to the earth, hide this, keep it safe, until someone remembers. Even today, not all of Copan has been unearthed, and some archaeologists argue that it shouldn't be, that to dig everything would be to undo the myth, that sometimes silence is part of the story, so when you visit, or if you simply imagine yourself there, know that every step you take is across a city still dreaming. The moss beneath your feet once lined the path to a king's chamber. The stone you brush your hand against may have once held a cup of cacao for a priest astronomer. And the wind that moves the leaves, it carries stories, not loud, not urgent, just present. Stories of farmers and scribes, of gods who blinked, of stars that vanished and returned, of children who once learned the sacred calendar by heart, and mothers who whispered prayers to corn. In the stillness of Copan, the past is not gone, only folded, tucked into roots, held by the stone, waiting, not to be shouted, but to be remembered. Imagine a stone court, long and narrow, framed by towering walls carved with glyphs and gods. The morning mist still clings to the edges of the limestone. The sun, still low in the sky, casts angled beams across the empty floor. A floor that will soon echo with the thud of rubber and the whispers of fate. This is the Poctapok court, not a place of play exactly, not in the way we understand it. For the Maya, this was something older than sport, heavier than ceremony. It was a ritual, a stage, a conversation with the gods. But before we watch the ball game, we must understand its audience. In the towering seats above, stone benches carved into the sides of temples, sit the elites of the Maya world. Priests draped in jaguar pelts, scribes with knotted cords and ink-stained fingers, nobles wearing elaborate headdresses taller than a man's arm span. These are not passive observers. Their gaze is part of the ritual, a channel through which power flows. The ball game wasn't just entertainment. It was myth made real, a reenactment of the hero twins and their journey through the underworld. A story central to the Popol Vuh, the sacred narrative of Maya creation. In that myth, the twins are summoned by the gods of death to play a game that becomes a trial, a journey, and a trick, one that ends in sacrifice and rebirth. So when the players step onto the court, they are not merely athletes, they are actors, priests, stand-ins for the forces that bind life and death. The rules of Pok to Pok were deceptively simple. Keep the solid rubber ball in play, using only your hips, thighs, and chest. Never hands, and never feet. The ball could weigh up to 9 pounds, and its impact could bruise bones. To score meant guiding the ball through a vertical stone hoop set high on the court walls, a nearly impossible feat. Most games ended with the ball bouncing endlessly, until the gods, or a priest, deemed one side victorious. But winning and losing, they meant more than points. Some courts were quiet. The crowd murmured, incense burning slow. Others were loud, filled with drums, shells, and chants. But always, always, there was the scent of sweat and something sharper. The smell of blood offerings left at the edge of the court. That's the part that lingers in the modern imagination, the blood. Did they really sacrifice the losing team? The winning team? The captain? The answer is maybe. You see, the Maya didn't think about sacrifice the way we do. For them, blood was a gift. It was not punishment. It was privilege. The offering of blood, especially royal blood, was an act of communion with the gods, an obligation to maintain the balance between worlds. In some inscriptions, victorious players are rewarded with gifts and honor. In others, the victors are depicted offering their own lives, their heads adorned with flowering vines, a symbol of life reborn. It's likely that only certain high-stakes games ended in ritual sacrifice. Not every match was final, not every match was fatal, but the possibility was always there, humming beneath the surface, like a string pulled tight. Let's return to the court. Two teams of warriors face each other. They are not peasants. These are trained elites, often of noble birth. Their bodies are sculpted by repetition, lunges, slams, twists. They wear thick belts of leather and padding around their hips. Some have elaborate headdresses, feathers stiff in the morning air. Others have painted their bodies with sacred symbols, invoking speed, favor, precision. A priest stands at the edge, holding a conch shell. He raises it to his lips and sounds the call. The ball is dropped. It hits the ground with a weighty, hollow thud, and the game begins. There are no referees. Only the gods are watching closely now. As the players pivot, leap, and contort their bodies to strike the ball, the rhythm of the game takes hold. It becomes hypnotic, a chant in motion, a heartbeat of muscle, sweat, and silence broken only by impact. And somewhere in the crowd, high on the temple edge, a priest quietly pricks his finger with a stingray spine, letting a single drop of blood fall into a woven bowl. The ritual begins to echo, above and below. What is most striking about the ball game is not the violence, but the control, the grace, the reverence with which each movement is made. These players are not merely trying to win. They are becoming part of something. The game is not a test of strength, but of balance, of alignment, of harmony between effort and fate. And if, by some miracle, a player sends the ball through the hoop, the court erupts, not in cheers, but in bells and drums and smoke. A decision has been made, not by man, by the divine. Let's pause here, because the next part of the story unfolds not in the game itself, but in what follows. In the palace halls, in the quiet chambers of priests, in the memories carved into stone, waiting for centuries beneath vines. After the final echo of the ball fades into the jungle's breath, something shifts. The players leave the court, some triumphant, some weary, all changed. The crowd disperses slowly, as though emerging from a shared trance. Drums grow silent. Incense thins. But the ritual continues, just beneath the surface. Because for the Maya elite, the game was never isolated. It was woven into a larger tapestry of ceremony, symbolism, and political power. Imagine a narrow stone corridor behind the court, where the air is thick and still. Here, the captains of the teams are led, not bound, but with quiet ceremony. Torches flicker along the walls, casting moving shadows over murals that seem to whisper stories of gods and blood and stars. If this match was one of the sacred games, the rare kind woven into calendars and omens, then this corridor leads to a chamber unlike any other. A room where the gods wait not in silence, but in expectation. Here, in this chamber, a priest dressed in jaguar skin kneels before a carved altar. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Every movement is a gesture learned since childhood, a ritual older than the city itself. Sometimes, the captain of the victorious team is offered a bowl, not of food, but of water, clear, still, touched by moonlight. He drinks, then kneels, not as a prisoner, as a vessel. Because the greatest honor in some of these rare games was not survival, but transcendence. To be sacrificed in such a ritual was to become myth yourself. Your name would be carved into temples, your image woven into codices. Your blood would feed the ceiba tree, the sacred axis that connects the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. Now, historians still debate who exactly was sacrificed, the winner, the loser, or someone else entirely. The evidence is scattered, symbolic, elusive. Like much of Maya history, it doesn't always speak in absolutes. It whispers. But what is certain is this: to be part of the ball game was to step into a sacred narrative. Every movement was part of a larger ritual, of death, renewal, cosmic order. And for the elites, this ritual reinforced power. It legitimized rulers who claimed descent from the gods. It reminded the people that harmony required sacrifice, that the world, with its rains and crops and stars, was balanced on blood and devotion. Let's leave the court for a moment and walk with the scribe. He's young, no more than 16, and he carries a bundle of bark paper books wrapped in cloth. He's been trained to see the layers in every symbol: the snake that means sky, the dot that means time, the curve that means rebirth. Tonight, he will record the game, but not just who won or lost. He will record the omens, the shape of clouds overhead, the dreams the priest had the night before, the direction the wind moved the incense smoke. Because in Maya ritual, nothing exists on its own. Everything connects. A ball game is never just a ball game. It is the reenactment of divine struggle. It is a mirror of the heavens. It is a negotiation with time itself. The scribe sits in a quiet chamber, lit by fireflies in a bowl of sap. His brush is made of jaguar whisker. His ink ground from red shell. He begins. In the year of the snake, on the 5th cycle of the moon, the gods watched. The ball game is over, but its story is just beginning. Now picture the morning after. The city is quieter. The dew hasn't burned off the stones yet. You can hear the call of howler monkeys from the trees beyond the temple walls. Everything smells faintly of damp limestone, wood smoke, and sweet maize cakes being warmed on clay griddles. In the noble compounds, the courtly aftermath unfolds. Priests speak in hushed tones with the Ajor, the ruling king, about the messages encoded in the match. Was the bounce of the ball toward the east an omen of good rains? Did the final score echo a number sacred to the maize god? They believe, deeply, that the gods speak in patterns, that the game was not just for entertainment, It was consultation, confirmation, communication. Meanwhile, the elite women, adorned in finely woven huipils, necklaces of carved jade, and headbands of quetzal feathers, gather in shaded courtyards. They whisper of dreams, of visions they felt during the match. Some believe they heard the voice of Ixchel, goddess of the moon and childbirth, in the rhythm of the drums. A few prepare offerings to burn in the small shrine beside the garden, a sprig of copal resin, a folded leaf containing a drop of their own blood. It's not gruesome, it's sacred, intimate, a gift offered in kind. Farther from the palace, in the homes of artisans and workers, children reenact the match with rubber balls half their size. Their laughter bounces off walls that are patched with clay and sun-bleached plaster. One boy pretends to be the captain, tying a sash around his head made from woven grass. Another shouts the name of a god every time the ball hits a wall. They don't need to understand the theology. The myth is in their bones, the rhythm is in their blood. And the ball game, like the rising sun or the first rain, is something they will carry into adulthood, not as a memory, but as a continuation. Back at the temple, the priests climb the pyramid to offer thanks. Smoke rises in spirals. One elder, blind in one eye and hunched with age, hums a tune no one else knows. It's said he played once, long ago, and the god spared him. He lifts a clay bowl. Inside is water, still as glass. He tips it forward just slightly, so that the reflection within tilts. And with it, the heavens shift. He sees Venus. He whispers, "It's still watching." What he means, no one asks. But in the Maya world, watching is everything. The gods do not roar, they observe. And so the rituals, the matches, the offerings, the prayers continue. Not for fear of wrath, but to hold the gaze, to be seen, to remain within the great story. Because to be forgotten, in this world, is the only true death. Even the stone carvings, the ones that line the ball court walls, seem to know this. Their glyphs are not merely names and dates. They're echoes, shadows of voices that refuse to fade. And somewhere in the city, a child learns to carve. Not for beauty, for memory. And so the years roll on, not like waves, but like corn kernels spilled from a clay bowl. One by one, a rhythm older than drums. In the great cities of the Maya lowlands, the ball game endures. The courts are swept clean, the walls repainted with fresh lime wash, and the stone hoops touched reverently by passing pilgrims. A tournament is always just days away, a festival always on the horizon. Ritual time loops, not marches forward. Every game is a memory repeating itself. You can imagine a game played 100 years later, in a different city, by different players, under a different sun. And yet, somehow the same. The ball still thuds against stone. The dust still lifts like breath. The crowd still holds its silence at the same moments. And the priests still raise their hands when the sun reaches the court's center. The old stories echo louder than any cheer. But now, something begins to change. The rains come later than they used to. The rivers pull back. Crops dry at the roots. And in the palaces, whispers grow longer than shadows. Some blame the priests. Some blame the stars. Some say the gods are restless, or worse, absent. One Ajor, proud and young, decides to increase the stakes. The match that season is not between villages or noble houses. It's between his own sons and the best warriors of a rival city. He wants to send a message to the gods, to the people, to history. And so, on the day of the match, He commands that the losing team, regardless of bloodline, be offered to the gods. Some cry treason, others tradition. But the match begins. It lasts until moonrise. When the final score is settled, the Ajor's eldest son kneels before the priests. No protest, no fear. He lifts his face to the stars. He believes truly that this is an honor, that his blood will open the skies, that the rains will return. They do not. But the story of that match is carved deeper than any before it, on stelae taller than a man, in glyphs wrapped in obsidian. Even today, in places far from the jungle cities, the tale lives on, in the rustle of wind through maize fields, in the echo of rubber soles on concrete courts. A child somewhere still ties a cloth around their forehead and pretends to be that prince, not because of death, but because of devotion, because the gods might still be watching. And if they blink, even for a moment, what we do, what we remember, must be bright enough to catch their eye again. So the ball rolls, the chant continues, and somewhere in the quiet, an old voice murmurs a name that hasn't been spoken in 1,000 years, just in case the gods are still listening. At night, after the chants faded and the drums fell silent, the sacred court did not rest. It shimmered beneath the moon, carved stone walls casting long shadows like frozen dancers. Torches crackled along its perimeter, their flickers caught in polished jade inlays, illuminating gods frozen in expressions of both judgment and celebration. You might imagine the air still, but it never truly was. There was always a breeze here, a whisper, soft as maize husks rustling in the field, that seemed to carry echoes, not of shouts or applause, but of breath held between beats of the ritual. In these hours, the elite would not walk the court, but they would sit above it in balconies draped with jaguar pelts, sipping thick cacao and murmuring about omens. Their garments, embroidered with quetzal feathers and bone beads, glowed faintly in the firelight. Here, power was not just worn, it was rehearsed, shown, ritually affirmed. The priest king too would return at these hours, not to rule but to remember. He would descend the stairs alone sometimes, barefoot on the stone, carrying a bowl of ash. He would sprinkle it in the center of the court and whisper a name, not always the same, a name only he knew. Some say he spoke to past players. Others say he spoke to the gods. Still others believe he spoke to himself, to the memory of the man he was before power claimed him. In the stone archives beneath the court, rarely visited, known only to scribes and seers, were bound codices sealed in wax. These held the names of every champion, every offering, every eclipse under which a ball game was held. Yet no one ever read them aloud. It was enough to know they were there, like bones under the earth. One codex, weathered but intact, contains a curious illustration. A ball player leaping in mid-air, arms outstretched, not toward the ball, but toward the sky. Around him, not spectators, but spirits, ancestors, gods, animals, all watching, their eyes not carved with awe or judgment, but with something gentler. Recognition. This is what the game had become. More than contest, more than pageant. It was a mirror, a way for the Maya to remember who they were before the walls, before the cities, before time was measured in stone glyphs. And in the flicker of a torchlight, you might understand. This was never about winners or losers. It was about remembering that breath is sacred, that movement is prayer, that even when the gods turn their faces away, the rhythm remains. The crowd had gathered, not just to see a contest, but to witness a covenant. The sacred ball court, with its towering stone walls and heavy silence, stood as a reminder. This was not mere sport. It was something older. The game was a mirror of the heavens, a ritual echo of the gods' battles in the underworld. Imagine yourself seated on a low platform beside the priests. The air is thick with incense, and the sound of flutes trickles like wind through the leaves. Opposing teams line up, not in colorful uniforms, but in adorned leather, bone jewelry, and blood-painted faces. These are not athletes in the modern sense. They are warriors, chosen from noble lineages, trained for balance, endurance, and silence. They do not speak. They do not cheer. Every move is deliberate, watched by the gods. The ball, heavy, made from rubber, and said to contain the breath of creation, is placed at center court. Players cannot use hands or feet, only hips, elbows, and shoulders. Every strike sends vibrations through the crowd, not just in sound, but in memory. This game has been played for hundreds of years, and each time, the meaning shifts, evolves, deepens. There are no referees, only stone carvings. Open-mouthed snakes and wide-eyed jaguars serve as silent witnesses. Some say these spirits still dwell within the glyphs, judging. As the match begins, a rhythm takes hold. Not fast, not aggressive. It is a dance. The ball bounces, thuds, turns mid-air, as though remembering a path from long ago. The players flow like river water. Their breath is measured. Their bodies trained for patience. To score is not to win. It is to align with the gods, to place one's body in harmony with the stars. And when the final point is made, not shouted, but accepted, the court grows still. In some ceremonies, one player is chosen, not the loser. Sometimes, not even the winner. Just one who has played with heart, with silence, with understanding. That player may be led from the court to the temple, given drink, bathed in herbs, wrapped in jaguar skins. There, before the elders and stars, a blade may be drawn. But this is not death as punishment. It is release, a return, a cycle fulfilled. The blood spilled is not tragedy. It is gratitude. It nourishes the gods, feeds the earth, continues the rhythm. And back in the court, the flutes play once more. By nightfall, the crowd has dispersed. The torches flicker low, and the air smells of stone dust and burned copal. But the court remains, unmoved, watching. It does not forget. Imagine walking its length after dark. Your footsteps echo. The walls rise beside you like ancient judges, and though the carvings are worn, their stories linger. Scenes of players leaping, kings watching, serpents circling. They are etched into the walls, not just to remember, but to remind. Some myths say that when the gods first created the world, they played this very game in the underworld. It was how they decided fate. And when humans were shaped from maize, they too were given the game. Not for pleasure, but for balance, to keep time in motion. Elite families trained their sons from childhood to understand this, not just to play, but to serve. The game was a schooling in humility, in devotion, and every noble who stepped into the court knew they did not own their life, they borrowed it, from their ancestors, from their city, from the sky. And yet, it was not all solemnity. After certain matches, there would be feasts, quiet ones, with tamales, honey drink, and music played on turtle shell drums. No loud laughter, just stories. Stories of old games, of players who became stars, of gods who once walked the court. Because even the mighty feared forgetting. Some ball courts, scholars say, were aligned with celestial paths, so that during solstices, the shadows would fall perfectly. as if the gods themselves had stepped down to watch. Others were built to echo. A whisper could travel end to end. It's said that in the stillest hours, you can hear voices in that echo. Not ghosts, not spirits, just memory, alive. And maybe that's the lesson, that every movement, a kick, a leap, a silence, is a thread in something bigger. That even a game, when treated with reverence, becomes a prayer. So if you ever stand at the edge of a Mayan ball court, do not shout, do not run. Close your eyes, listen, because the game never truly ends. Look closely at the center stone ring, high above where any ball would ever land. It was never meant to be reached. It was symbolic, aspirational, a reminder that the gods set their own rules and mortals merely played beneath their gaze. The ring was not a target, it was a question, one that could never be answered directly. Some believe that on quiet nights, when the wind threads gently through the saber trees and moonlight strikes the ring just so, a hum rises from the stone. Not sound exactly, more like a pressure behind the eyes, as if the gods are leaning in, listening, remembering who still remembers them. In one village, elders tell of a boy who once played alone in a ruined court. With no ball, he tossed stones. With no crowd, he spoke aloud to the shadows. And it's said that when he grew tired and laid down beneath the center line, he dreamed of ancestors seated along the walls, watching in silence, their faces carved from the stars themselves. He woke with dust on his brow, and the impression of a jaguar's paw pressed into the earth beside him. True or not, the story endures, passed down in whispers, and that too is a form of ritual. Because even long after the players are gone, and the incense has faded, and the blood has dried beneath vines and moss, the shape of the court remains. It waits, not to be used, but to be remembered. Just like the gods, just like the stories. And so we leave it there, under the quiet starlight, still listening, still watching, still waiting for the next game to begin. So now we step back, slowly, gently, from the edge of the court, from the temple shadows, from the steaming fields of maize and the quiet hum of stars. You've walked through the breath of the Maya world, not the one of pyramids and conquests, but of footsteps and stories, of stone eyes that still gaze, of hands grinding maize before the sun stirs, of gods who blink and return, of cities swallowed not by silence, but by song. And as your breath deepens, you might wonder how much was real and how much was memory. But the Maya would smile at that. To them, memory was real. Dreams were real. The world was layered, not divided. So maybe you didn't just listen. Maybe, for a little while, you lived there. Among the rhythm of rain and drum, among the sweat and smoke and stars. And as you drift now into the hush between waking and sleep, know this. There are stories the earth keeps better than paper. Stories worn into the shape of tools, of paths, of shrines. Stories not told, but felt. And tonight, one of them found you. Not to be remembered, just not to be forgotten.